possible values are true or false. It's a Boolean type. If it is false, it's not required. By default, the value is false. So description. So you can specify a smaller description about the purpose of the variable, the purpose of declaring the variable. So access specifies scope of the variable. Name specifies name of the variable. What is the name of the variable? And type specify data type of the variable. And so required can be either true or false to make the variable as required. Default can be to initialize the default value to the variable, and you can provide a specific description about the variable. So these are the different attributes. Different parameters you can pass to the aura attribute. They are simply a variable in the component. So what's the purpose of declaring this variable? To data passing, to transfer the data or to pass the data for the data communication, to communicate the data from client-side controller to the component. So it's not related to any server-side controller. It's server-side controller, the variables are different. So generally when you declare a class, you can define different variables inside of the class. That part is different because we are not talking about the server-side controller now. So these are the variables specific to the client-side controller. So for example, you have the data in the client-side controller. How can you pass the data to the component? So generally in MVC, so you have client side and you have the server side. In client side itself, you have the component or application. At the same time, you have the client side JS, that is controller JS. This is our client side controller. So this client side controller always connects to the server side controller to fetch the data or to pass the information. It's a bidirectional. So when you have the data in a client side, so let's say I have the data in a client side. I have the data here. I have the data here. So how can you pass the data to your component? The component is here. So for that, for the communication between client-side controller and the view. The view is our component. Client-side controller and the component. So we use the variables. These are the variables. For the communication, we use the variable either to display the data in the component or passing the data to the component or set the new values or get the values. So we use aura attributes. So these are the additional parameters that you can define to the aura attribute. So currently in our example, let's go to our example. So I have given a static text here. So let's say the customer personal information. What I can do is I can make it as a attribute here. I'm just going to define one attribute So generally we define the attributes at the top of the component or a attribute. As I told you, it has different parameters: type equal to, name equal to, default equal to. These are the, if you want to make it required, you can do that. The default value is this label, customer personal information. So in which variable you want to store this default text? I would like to store in title. Title is our variable name. What is the type of this title? String type. So you just go to your component. Just go to your component and put it a dynamic field. So view dot untitled, which displays the text from attribute because we are specifying the default text. So when you specify, these are nothing but the variables. We are just storing the data in a variable and using that variable in our component. Generally, what you do in an Apex class, a server-side controller, let's say public class name, you define the variables inside of public string title, which is equal to customer information. For example, this is the title, and in any method of the class, you can use the title. Let's say if you print the title, so it will print this text, customer information, which means once you define, generally where you define the variable at the top of the method. Once you define a class, we generally define the variable. Similar to that, we define attributes here. So these are the client-side variables just to pass the data. So passing the data, we use our just like a storage element to store some information. Either it can be the list of records or a string information or the integer or the map of data. We must define attributes. Just go to your application and refresh. You don't see there is any change because instead of using a static text, I'm using attribute. Similar to that, I'm defining attributes for other values. We can define default. Copy this and remember that these attributes are unique in the component. You cannot define the same attribute name more than once. So first name, what is the name? Sorry, type is string and the name is first name, and these are case insensitive. You must define in the same way. So suppose if you retrieve the value with let's say your declaration has an upper letters, but when you are using it, if you specify the lower letters, it doesn't identify. First name, last name, I'm specifying the same values. Attribute string, name is company, default value is just company, country, or let's say phone. Can specify the string, default value, and again string, just copy, email, country. I declared different attributes, simply I can call it as a variable and store the data. So whenever you want to refer those, so here is the first name. Here is the first name. I can just use v dot first name. Here v refers the view. V dot last name. V dot. You can use a small v dot company. So we must use the same names. We must use the same names because it's a case insensitive. So better when you add a code, better you copy the names everywhere and use it in the code. Save it and go to your application and preview. You can see the differences. See, I mean, there is no change in the UI, but the values are coming from attributes. So we're just defining attributes for that. So these are the attributes. The main purpose of attributes are data storage. So like the variables that you define in between a component and a client-side controller. So this client-side controller. So if you want to pass these values, you can pass to the client-side controller. That is the purpose of attributes. So let's say if you have the data, you have the list of accounts. You want to display those accounts in a component. So you must define an attribute for that. So without attribute, you cannot store the data. So this is an advantage of,
Nara,
yeah,
Nara, can you wait for a minute?
yeah,
1 second. Can you wait for a minute? Just
sure,
give me 2 minutes, okay?
sure, yeah.
Sorry, Nara. Continue.
Yeah. So attributes are used just like a variable in the component. The purpose is
Mm-hmm.
to communicate the data from client-side controller to the component at the same time to display the data
Yeah.
within a component. And these are the possible parameters you can define to each attribute. And this is
Yeah.
a basic example.
Yeah.
So let's say, just a moment, I need to charge my laptop. Just a moment, just a minute. Sorry. Yeah. So that's why it is.
Yeah, man. I'm here. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's say, so I have given a static text here. So I mean, I have given a default text to each attribute. So my requirement is I want to pass the dynamic text. I want to pass the dynamic text from the application, passing the parameters to the component from the application, the values to the attributes of component from the application. So my requirement is when I call the component, I want to pass the data. Let's say here I am calling the component. Component name is customer details. I have the different attributes in my component. I want to pass the title. So instead of passing this, I want to pass a different title. You can do that. So if you don't pass anything, then it will take the default text. I am passing the title equal to, let's say, customer information. And for the second component, I'm passing a different title, say employee information. Save it and go to your application and you can see the difference. The first component it has customer information and for the second component it has employee information. But the component is same. The width and height of the component is same. Inside of the attributes are same. But we are passing the dynamic text. So let's say for the first component, I want to make these default values. But for the second component, I want to change the first name, last name, and other parameters. What you can do is you just specify the space and use first name equal to, and what is the last name equal to. So you must use the same names. The case is insensitive, so you must copy these values, these name values. Here names are the key values. You have to use these values whenever you call the component. Save it. So you can see the value differences. So these are the dynamic text that I am passing from an application to the component when I invoke the component. So you can invoke the same a number of times. Let's say then put the table and use tr, tds, and you call the component side by side. There is no limit to execute the same components n number of times. You can invoke the same component any number of times. See, you can invoke the same component any number of times. And you can pass the different parameters and different titles as well. Just remove the margin somewhere. So one can be the customer information, one can be employee information, and one can be student information, and one can be some admissions. So you can display a number of components in a single application by pausing different data. Let's say it's a customer information, employee information. This can be student details. This can be admissions.